right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back today with another episode with somebody who's going to tell us a little bit about one of our favorite plants, cannabis or marijuana or whatever you like to call it. We've got Christopher Hudalla, Ph.D. How you doing?
Doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on and talking with us a little bit. A lot of people out there, big fan of this plant. He is an analytical chemist and chief scientific officer down there at Proverde Labs out there in Massachusetts. You guys are just exclusively in Massachusetts?
We have a small satellite facility in Portland, Maine, but we do testing for hemp clients all over the world.
Wow. Well, that'll start me off on my first question about hemp, which is obviously not as popular as the psychoactive form of cannabis, but would there ever be any trace amounts of THC in any hemp plants?
Yes, there is typically THC. So the plant doesn't know that it's hemp versus marijuana. The cannabis plant is the cannabis plant. The definition of hemp is a man-made construct, which many feel is not appropriate. But basically, if you ask a hemp plant, if it's a hemp plant, it's going to say, no, I'm a cannabis plant. Same response from a marijuana plant.
If these plants could talk, the stories they'd tell.
Oh, my goodness, they would.
So I wanted to also ask you at the beginning about your journey, your academic journey, how you got to this point. Were you somebody who had experience before in this field, or did you come from science and then kind of come into it that direction?
No, I came from the science realm, more academic. I did a doctorate in analytical chemistry, and right out of my doctorate program, postdoctoral program, I worked for an instrument manufacturing company, Waters Corporation. They manufacture a lot of the high-end instrumentation that is currently being utilized for the cannabis industry. Typically, those instruments would be commonplace in the pharmaceutical realm and the food testing realm. But I spent 14 years working with Waters Corporation and left there in 2013 to focus on cannabis analytics. And part of that was in 2013 is when Massachusetts, the state where I currently reside, legalized marijuana for medical purposes. And so we were one of the first labs in Massachusetts to address the regulatory testing needs. And part of that, we were among the first laboratories in the United States to be ISO 17025 accredited specifically for cannabis.
Uh-oh.
That is an accreditation that has nothing to do with marijuana or cannabis, but rather good laboratory practices, verifying the validity of your test results, validating your methods, calibrating your instruments, training your employees. And it's basically an international standard for documenting all these activities associated with laboratory testing. And we apply that same standard as it applies to the hemp and marijuana testing.
Yeah. So, and that's interesting because that's just the way that you're doing it. But what was the standard? Did you treat it as a pharmaceutical? Do you treat it as a food? What were the standards at the beginning of the medical marijuana thing where they expected you to have a certain test for this or that?
Yeah, so when we started in 2013, Massachusetts was the first state to mandate analytical testing. But even at that time, it was unclear what that really meant, what that looked like. And so with no roadmap, we kind of looked at the FDA type testing and tried to validate our methods according to the stringent requirements of FDA and GMP. We don't know when FDA will get involved or when GMP will be required. We know it's coming down the pike, and I would rather start establishing a testing laboratory that's already focusing on that level of standard, and that means that there's less conversion once it does go FDA.
Do you think that there will be a vast difference between the regulation of medical versus recreational in the future?
I would think so. I would hope so, partly because if you think about potential contaminants in cannabis, most of the contaminants that are in cannabis are probably not problematic for the majority of the population. If, on the other hand, you're using cannabis for medical purposes, if you have any kind of immune compromised condition, There's a lot of conditions where having these contaminants would be really detrimental. And I would be in favor of seeing stricter standards for a medical program than they are for an adult use program. Today, most jurisdictions have no difference between medical and adult use. And in many cases, the stringent requirements for adult use are those that are appropriate for the medical program. And so in many cases, probably overly stringent.
Yeah. Well, which is good. And I think both, it's probably okay to take some extra time and say, let's make this safe across the board for everybody.
Sure.
But hey, the profit motive, you probably see a lot of people cutting corners.
Oh, a lot of people cutting corners.
So I wanted to ask you about some of the stuff, because my experience growing weed, I've always had pretty good luck just going organic and the least amount, no pesticides, nothing like that. But are pesticides pretty normal with the regulated cannabis market?
In the regulated cannabis market, at least in Massachusetts, no. There's such a negative view of pesticides. Massachusetts is one of the few states that has a zero tolerance. They do not permit any levels, whereas most states will have limits that are based on toxicity. Massachusetts basically says we don't tolerate any. And so initially the state said, well, we're going to make you test down to zero. And I said, well, zero is not a number. It's a theoretical place that doesn't exist. I mean, what happens if it's 0.000000001? It's not zero. It's greater than zero. So essentially, Massachusetts established a limit of 10 parts per billion for any pesticide. And those are, it's the tightest limit of any pesticide in any state that I'm aware of. Ironically, Massachusetts has one of the smallest list of pesticides. So we are only required to test for 9 pesticides currently. But they are at the very stringent limits.
That's really interesting. So other states have longer lists of potential pesticides.
Much longer.
Wow. Well, I'm not a big fan of the pesticides. I don't think that they're probably not too good, and they tend to be used in monocropping and industrial agriculture. And it's starting to be questionable whether or not people want them. I'm in Germany, of course, and they've outlawed glyphosate as of this year. So another thing I want to talk about is terpenes. What is this? What are terpenes?
Terpenes are a class of chemicals that give the cannabis plant its beautiful aroma, a lot of the flavor, but also is thought to be behind a lot of the physiological effects that are experienced with cannabis use. We hear a lot of people talking about the differentiation between sativas and indicas, and really what makes a sativa or an indica is really about the terpene profiles. Again, a sativa plant doesn't know it's a sativa plant. It has to do with the terpenes that are expressed in the plant along with the cannabinoids. And if you believe the entourage effect, there's a lot of literature on that where they work synergistically together. We have seen studies where they treat with isolated cannabinoids and then treat another group of patients with a full spectrum plant extract, and the results are pretty different. The terpenes certainly have some kind of role in how we experience cannabis. So they're really important from a flavor profile, but also equally important in the physiological effects.
All right. Good to know. Good to know. So if you have a certain smell, if you like it skunky, maybe you're going to get a certain kind of feeling out of it.
Absolutely.
Interesting. All right. How about stuff like you test for all kinds of stuff at your place? They bring people, whether you have even private people come in, yeah?
Yes.
What about mold and mildews? What kind of stuff do we see there, and how often do you see it?
That's probably the biggest challenge. Massachusetts, where I live, also has some very stringent microbial limits. In Massachusetts, we test for total aerobic, total coliform, total bile-tolerant gram-negative, and total yeast and mold, as well as E. coli and salmonella. Other states are only looking at the pathogenic microbes which are harmful to humans. So under the Massachusetts regulations, half the things in my refrigerator would fail. Yogurt would fail. Blue cheese would fail. Aerobic bacteria are not necessarily bad. In fact, they're necessary for life. They're necessary for cultivation. And so a lot of the plant activity is based on microbial activity, which is necessary for plant nutrition and plant growth. So just to say that you have mold or bacteria there doesn't necessarily render a plant toxic or harmful. On the other hand, like in California, where they specify only E. coli, Salmonella, and Aspergillus, there's, other microbial contaminants which are causing harm, things like mucor. We see people with cryptococcal pneumonia. So there are other microbes that should be of concern. Microbes are, as I said, natural to any cultivation, and so it's difficult to grow and have no microbial activity in a final plant. Question is how much is acceptable? Well, it depends on how toxic it is. And that's without doing speciation, you don't really know whether it's good mold or bad mold.
Interesting. I mean, considering that we're just now finding out about the microbiome of the gut, and we've lived in kind of a sterile world for so long that we forget that everything's got little bugs on it. So do you think prohibition has been rough for a lot of people who are just trying to enjoy? Do you think that this is a plant that's inherently as dangerous as they have said it has been for so long?
No, I mean, we have thousands of years of experience with this plant, and for the most part, it has done no harm. We are using it differently than we ever used to. So how we as humans consume or interact with the plant has changed dramatically over even the past 5 years in the respect that we're targeting higher cannabinoid concentration plants. So we see it used to be 20% THC was a high yielding cannabinoid in a plant, and now we see them pushing 30, 35%. And so we're using it at much higher concentrations. We're also extracting it. And so it's not uncommon to have people using 99% pure THC. What does that do to long-term health? It's going to take us some years to understand that. Certainly, there's been some documentation that shows that is detrimental to the developing brain. So I certainly would not recommend that a teenager be vaping these high THC vapes. On the other hand, we've worked with children on the medical side who are using cannabinoids, both THC and CBD, for seizure control, for autism, and they're using it very effectively. Wow. So a lot of it has to do with dose and how we're using it. High THC products, there's probably some long-term harm if you're using it frequently, on multiple times a day. It's probably not beneficial.
Well, like we were talking before we started recording, everything in moderation. Otherwise, you're asking for trouble.
Exactly.
Well, and I wanted to ask you, because the NIH, the National Institute of Health, something like this, they came out and said it's addictive, and I just had to shake my fist and say I don't believe that to be true.
In the sense, like we were talking, chocolate, coffee. I'm a caffeine addict. I love coffee in the morning. Shopping, porn. I mean, whatever your vices are. I have more than one.
All of the above.
So yes, it can be addictive in that sense. Just as, say, antacids could be, as eye drops can be addictive, because as you're putting eye drops in your eye, pretty soon your ducts learn that they don't need to produce tears as much, and then you become dependent on eye drops. So what do you mean by addiction? Is it chemically addictive like heroin? No, I don't believe that's the case. But can it be addictive like shopping and chocolate, caffeine? Absolutely.
Interesting. Wow. All right. Well, good to know. Well, one of the things that's happening here in Germany right now is they are edging ever closer to this moment where they're going to make it legal. But the laws remain in place to where if you say that you're a regular smoker or that you've smoked a joint in the last week or 2 weeks, that you're not fit to drive. How long does the psychoactive effects of this plant, or THC specifically, how long does that last in most people?
Again, it depends on how much you're dosing in your route of administration. In general, it's probably on the order of hours. Maybe if you're getting really stoned, maybe 8 hours. But it can really depend on the individual. If you're taking edibles, edibles can be longer. And if you're taking high doses of edibles, a lot of that can be impacted by your gut biome, what you've had to eat that day can actually change how you experience an edible. And so I would certainly say 8 to 12 hours would be a concern. In the US, there's a big focus on drug testing for motor vehicle incidents. And the problem I have with that is that even several days after consumption, you can still have the metabolites in your blood or urine or saliva even. And so having metabolites or cannabinoids in your blood or urine are not indicative of impairment. But when you think about impairment, look at alcohol. I have very good friends who are highly functioning alcoholics that drink a liter of vodka a day and work for the federal government, and you would never know it. Now, their liver is probably nearly toast, but they are highly functioning and not really intoxicated. Whereas a novice can have half a drink and be, stumbling, mumbling, drunk. Cannabinoids would be really no different, in that it depends on the individual, the history of consumption, the amount that they're consuming, and the route of administration.
Interesting. So, and also your metabolism, how fast you can burn. And does it attach to the fat, these things?
Yep. So it depends on how you're consuming it, but eventually it does end up in the fat. Even if you're highly consuming cannabis products and then abstain for a couple days, your body can start going to ketosis, or where you're starting to absorb the fat or digest the fat, and you will release cannabinoids that are stored there. So you can have these cannabinoid or cannabinoid metabolites still showing up in your system several days after consumption.
Wow. And I love this idea that you're also taking THC and CBD and having incredible success, showing medicinal benefits with that. That's cutting edge. Do you think that things will keep rolling along as far as laxing up on some of the rules and laws, pushing the whole green movement forward?
I think so. The thing is the cannabis use has become very acceptable, at least in the U.S. And certainly, I think globally, there's a warmer attitude towards it. It's been demonized for so long for the wrong purposes. It was never about health and safety. It was more about politics and racism than anything. But as we start looking at the potential medicinal benefits, the nutritional or the health benefits to it, we are seeing more acceptance to it. For me, if I were commercializing something, my target demographic would be the senior citizen population, because arthritis, growing old sucks. I mean, you start getting aches and pains that can be really minimized by cannabinoid use. Cannabinoid topicals are great for arthritis, and they're not intoxicating. So I think that as those treatments become more acceptable, if somebody's using a THC topical for arthritis, that's not covered under most medical programs. And so that would be considered adult use. I prefer the term adult use over recreational, because a lot of the adults who are using cannabis aren't using it recreationally. They're just using it to get through the day. And while some people may consider it medical, it doesn't fit under the medical programs in many states.
That is just so sad. And I can contest to the idea. I use it for my own mental and physical discomforts and pain and everything like that. And I don't know what I would do with that. For me, it's a miracle drug.
Yeah. For many.
Yeah. So, well, we're going to cut you off now, and we're going to have you come back one day. We're going to check in with you and see where we're at with this whole thing. And, weed power, everybody. Christopher Hudalla, Ph.D., analytical chemist down there at Proverde Labs. If you have some weed, you want to get it tested, send it his way. He'll do it right. He'll do all the sciencey stuff you don't even know about. Check it out. Anything you want to add?
Nope.
All right. Well, we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Right.